Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 874 for the 15th of October 2023. Richard Saunders coming to you from a very echoey kitchen, my standby studio here in Oakland, California. Coming up on this week's show, which is slightly late due to jet lag, I'll blame something, we have another trip, oh yes, once more onto the breach, another trip to Mind Body Wallet. Mind Body Spirit in Darling Harbour, Sydney. This time I'm joined by Tim Mendham, Ieraci and Darryl Colquhoun as we wander the aisles of the mystical and the magical and the fake and the fabulous New Age Festival in Sydney. What do we discover? What didn't we discover? Stand by to find out. After that, it's You Can Count On Adrienne, which I often do. And this week Adrienne talks to Kelly Burke and Faith Newsome Rodriquez about the famous Stanford Marshmallow Experiments that were conducted in 1972 with follow-up studies declaring that a child's ability to delay gratification would be a predictor of future success. Marshmallows. I would fail that test in an instant. Find out about the famous marshmallow test coming up with Adrienne Hill. Then it's the Book of Tim, part 2 of Phoney Fauna. Tim looks at the strange and weird fake animals that have made news in history. And to round off the show, the Trove segment looks at the Mind Body Spirit Festival from decades in the past. Many decades in the past, what did reporters at the time think of the Mind Body Wallet, Mind Body Spirit Festival in Sydney? But now it's time for me to run nowhere. I'm actually in a kitchen. I'm going to open the fridge and get me a nice cold root beer. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Let's sit in this semi-nice shady spot near the water fountains. I'm with Tim Mendham. Hello, Tim.
Hi there, Richard.
Hi there, Tim. Are you incognito today?
I am actually. I'm pretending to be someone else.
And Ieraci.
Sean Connery.
You're Sean. There's a line there somewhere. And Ieraci, hello.
Good morning, Richard. I'm pretending to be Tim.
You're doing an excellent job too, actually.
Well, you're both pretending to be New Age people because we're here at the Mind Body Wallet, the Mind Body Spirit. It hasn't opened yet. And we're going to be wandering around seeing what we can see. You're particularly excited, I think, Sue.
I'm very excited because it's my first time appearing as Tim, as well as my first time at Mind Body Wallet.
I always get you two confused.
Because we look like sisters.
That's right.
I've got my purple dress on and my sort of carved ivory, whatever that is.
Whatever that is. No, it's important that we do this. It's one of the questions people ask me, why do you go to Mind Body Spirit? And this is like 20 years now I've been coming to Mind Body Spirit. And I said, well, it's because we're not armchair skeptics.
Yeah, that's right, actually. I sit on the lounge most of the time.
You're a lounge skeptic, all right.
Yeah, no, I think it's good to see what's happening. It's obviously, a lot of the things are the same that you've seen before.
Yeah.
Even if the faces have changed, it's the same products.
Yeah.
But there are other things occasionally that's new and exciting. New technology is always good, actually, because that's always developing into amazing areas.
And more machines that go bing with lights.
Lots of bing, actually. I always like a good bing, actually. But last time I came, I actually went to a meditation session.
Yeah.
That was interesting, except there was a lot of announcements being made at the same time. And I complained to the guy who was running it. I said, it's bloody difficult to do a meditation here with all the noises going on. Like it is here at the moment, actually, all these fountains.
We're right near all these fountains, and they're doing construction work just near us. But this is Darling Harbour, and this went right near the huge exhibition centre. And this is where the Mind Body Spirit Festival is. It has been for some years. And some years ago, 3-4 years ago, they decided to make it free. You used to have to pay. But it's free now, but you have to register. So I think that's a clever marketing choice.
It is. I keep getting emails from them from years back, actually,
that's
these
right,
days.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think free is good. Actually. Well, yeah, they need the audience. That's
and it's worth every cent.
Probably, no, less.
What are you hoping or not hoping to see, Sue?
be interested to see whether some of the so-called technology, like the machines that go bing or ping in medical parlance, whether they're still here or whether the protests we made and the regulation has actually reduced their presence.
Yeah.
So either they're here and the regulation hasn't worked and we'll be able to expose them, or they're not here because past exposure has actually had its effect.
Yeah, that's a great angle. I like that. Oh, well, we'll sit here for a little while.
Can I talk about the applied kinesiology
Yes. What?
souls, the inner souls?
Oh, hello, yes.
Remember sort of a few years ago that you and one other person got thrown out
Yes.
because you dared question.
Well, we left voluntarily. I'll
you
say
were asked
that.
to leave,
Yeah.
voluntarily.
Yeah.
But I went back there, I think, the next year or so, and he was still there,
Yeah.
still making the same claims. I didn't confront him in the way you did because I valued my health.
That wasn't me. That was somebody else.
Yeah, no, it was too. But they kept saying how it's, as I say, TGA approved, which is the Therapeutic Goods Administration, which is our equivalent of the FDA or
Yeah.
something like that. No, it's not approved. It's called listed.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is send in your details and you get listed. They never check whether it's accurate or not.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what do you have to go through to get this TGA approval? He goes, oh, it's very difficult. Very difficult. I said, yeah, I'm sure it is with you guys. But he's still there, still making the same pitch.
We saw on the brochure, on the online brochure, that those people are back, the insult people, and part of the testing they do is the applied kinesiology.
Yeah.
And we know what that's worth about as much as a cracker. So we shall see. We shall see. We'll sit down here by the fountain and the seagulls and the bike riders and the pedestrians and the
building work.
and the building work, and we'll soon be entering mind, body, spirit.
Yay.
We entered the Mind, Body, Spirit Festival and were greeted by the usual array of stores selling crystals, magic, water, homeopaths, iridologists, psychics, naturopaths, Reiki healers, and the sort of things that you would normally expect to find. We met up with our friend Darryl Colquhoun, but soon lost Sue Ieraci as she was going from stall to stall, examining every claim and asking interesting questions. She ended up getting a neck scan from a chiropractor. What was interesting this year was the lack of astrology computers and general machines that go beep. In other words, body scanning devices. Finally, Tim Mendham and I ended up at a lecture given by a naturopath or a intuitive nutritionalist, or I can't remember exactly what she called herself, about how to live longer. But we didn't stay long before it was time to leave. Well, this is the other side. This is after about 2 hours. We're walking out of the Mind Body Wallet Festival and we're looking at the view. Lots of construction here at Darling Harbour. Sue, you were saying that you really enjoyed it, more or less.
I had a great time there, Richard, and I guess it's probably set up to appeal to older women. And I felt like I was in the Easter Show pavilion where you can find interesting fashions and colours and design and jewellery, and there was certainly a lot of that.
Oh, every year you'll find interesting things to buy. I often buy hot sauce. I didn't see any this year. But you were the perfect person to bring because you look the part. You look like the sort of people that they would, they gravitate to. And you were going from stall to stall to stand to stall, asking questions and getting all sorts of information.
Yes, and I have to say I went there with genuine curiosity and enjoyment. And a lot of the stalls had things that I was interested in, like clothing and some of the cosmetics that were handmade and smelled nice, I had no problem with. And because I was in that frame of mind, I was able to then go to some of the more dodgy stalls and with the same demeanour and enjoyment.
But you had a neck scan, you had a thing, you had this treatment, you had this. It was quite amazing.
I had a very interesting neck scan that maybe I can report on later.
Yeah, we'll look for maybe in the pages of the Skeptic magazine, Tim Mendham.
Absolutely. I think it's very important, actually, especially if getting a fresh set of eyes to look at this place, actually, because you're fairly jaundiced, having been there, and I've been here enough too. Yeah, it's amazing how many... There's always the sort of generic things like the jewellery and that sort of thing. There's a lot of psychics, more than I recall, but you say there's often a lot of psychics. The psychic stalls, not the psychic room.
They're dotted around.
Yeah. But also the age-old ones who are always there, our friends at Orgone Energy and the man with the inner souls to help you balance and that sort of thing.
And the crystals and the chakras.
Well, the crystals everywhere. I'm not quite sure it's the same people selling the crystals, are they?
I don't think so. Oh, wow, they come and go.
And that enormous purple, looks like amethyst crystal, which they said is $6,000.
$6,000.
Mined from a mine. So they're digging up crystals, crystal formations, and from Brazil, and said very heavy, couldn't pick it up, but $6,000 was slightly beyond my price range.
And as long-time listener and supporter Darryl Colquhoun, Darryl, you've been to this before with me. Anything catch your eye this time around?
There were a couple of things missing that I'd seen before and that were not there anymore. Better not mention the names, I suppose. But maybe
Scientology.
maybe those things have been found out and have gone out of business. Let's hope. A
lot of businesses go out of business. I've seen products here over the years which have disappeared a decade ago.
Yeah, that's true. But there was the usual spread of genuine businesses. There was a young lady selling genuine Aboriginal art.
Yes.
Done by her husband, and he's going to be here this afternoon, in fact, doing it.
And genuine food and genuine clothes and jewellery and
That's right.
Well, thanks for coming along.
Thank you.
Keep an eye out for future editions of the Skeptic magazine, where Sue, Tim and I will be writing a report about Mind, Body, Spirit for 2023. And yes, it will be back in 2024, and so will we.
Hello, Skeptic Zone listeners. This is Susan Gerbic from the GSOW Wikipedia Project. I also explore the world of psychic mediums, grief vampires, and expose their tricks and methods to exploit people. If you'd like to join me on this journey, please subscribe to my channel on YouTube, Psychics Explained. Or if you need help remembering that name, it's also Psychic Sex Planed. I think I'll get a lot more viewers that way. But please join the conversation and subscribe.
You Can Count on Adrienne with Adrienne Hill.
Hello everyone, this is Adrienne Hill from Skookum Studios in Canada, and this week I have a couple people joining me and I'm so excited. And first we have
Kelly Burke.
Hey Kelly. And we also have
Faith Newsome Rodriquez.
Hey Faith. I'm so glad you both could join me. And to start off, I want to know a little bit about what you've been up to lately, because Kelly, you haven't been on here for a while. So tell us some of the things that you've been doing.
Oh dear, it's been a really long time. Right now I'm getting ready to start back into the school year, but I've been traveling a lot this summer, making it extra difficult for Adrienne to coordinate recording times. And I've been working with SGU. I don't know if I was last time I was on the podcast. That's been fantastic.
For those of you who aren't familiar, and if you're not, you've got to check them out. But the SGU is the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe podcast. And if I am correct, Kelly, you monitor and run all the social media.
Yes.
And you're doing a really great job, especially the Monday math jokes, which is close to my heart.
Thank you. And thank you for the many of them that you've supplied.
And now, Faith, can you talk a little bit about your role with the Triangle Skeptics? Because we talked not that long ago about the Hawthorne effect, but we never really talked about all your skeptical activism that you're part of.
We're trying to actually build the group and get more membership, and that's what we're working with Susan Gerbic and CFI, trying to become affiliate of them. And I'm actually the treasurer. I don't do much treasury duties, but I actually do we have a board meeting later today to talk about more skepticism, outreach, and things like that.
Yes, we joined your group, Susan and I, last year.
Last May.
And it was great fun. And you had a pretty good turnout. And I hope you really have continued success and continue to grow your group. Today, we're going to be talking about the Stanford Marshmallow Test, which Kelly and I certainly knew about from our teaching careers. And Faith, I believe you knew about it as well. How did you learn about it?
Well, I have my bachelor's in social work, and we had to take clinical psychology classes as part of that. And this is where I heard about the study. So, 18, 19 years old and being petrified about something, being told about this test and having this idea that as soon as you're like 4 years old, you're basically can predict if you're going to be set up for a life of failure in some areas or you'll be successful.
So, Kelly, what did you think the Stanford Marshmallow Test was before we looked into this?
Yeah, so like Faith, I learned about it in like child development classes when I was getting my degree in education. And the picture that I had of it, I think the narrative that a lot of people who know of it have is the kid's given a marshmallow and they're told they can have 2 if they wait until the researcher comes back, or if they eat it beforehand, they only get the 1. And then that there was a follow-up that found a correlation between the child's ability to wait and their future success. The context I learned it in was in that childhood development, like learning about delayed gratification and at what age that is expected to start. But then also I was told that relationship between the ability to delay gratification and their success.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. In fact, I believe it was either in 2017 or 2018, which was the last year I was a teacher before I retired. And we actually had somebody come in for professional development. And the whole thing was about the Stanford Marshmallow Test and the delayed gratification and how important the concept was for future success.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? So late in my career. So I had much the same idea as what you guys said, that delayed gratification will predict a person's future success. So now let's talk about what the study was, about when it was, and what they actually did conclude. Kelly, can you elaborate on that, please?
So the original studies actually weren't even that like simple narrative that I had the picture of, because what they were really looking at was the different factors that affect children's ability to delay gratification. So in the first study, they had the children split up into 5 groups. And in all of the groups, the kids were told that the researcher was leaving for 15 minutes and then would come back and they play with toys. But they had a bell they could ring to bring the researcher back at any time. And then between those 5 groups, some of the groups were offered treats. They had a choice between a marshmallow and a pretzel. And they were told if they waited the whole time, they got their preferred treat. Or if they called the researcher back early, they'd get their non-preferred treat. Some of the groups were given a toy to play with. One of the groups was told to think of fun things while they were waiting. And then some of the groups weren't told anything to do during that time. And so it really looked at, do these distractions help? Do these rewards help when a child is trying to delay that gratification? And so what that first study found was that being given a task to do while you're waiting or being offered a reward for waiting increased the amount of time that the children waited. So then in their third experiment in this original set, they still had those 3 groups, but in this case, they covered the treats. So the kids weren't sitting there staring at them the entire time. And between the 3, they asked the kids to either think about fun things, think about the treats, or no task at all. And in that group, again, the kids who were asked to think about fun things were able to wait a really long time, but also the kids who weren't given any task were also able to wait almost as long as those kids who were asked to think about fun things, because again, they weren't sitting there staring at the treats. But the group that was asked to think about the treats, again, was still thinking about them even though they were covered. So that group wasn't able to wait as long, but the other 2 were pretty close. About 20 years later, I believe, there were 3 major longitudinal studies that looked at correlations with SAT scores and self-esteem and BMI. And I think those were definitely the ones that we were hearing about, because that's when they decided that delayed gratification is this really important thing that we need to think about. But as we're going to get into, that's not necessarily the entire story.
Exactly. In fact, it was 1989 when the follow-up study was done by Walter Mischel and he was originally at Stanford University. And I don't know if he was there when he did the longitudinal study. But what it says is those 4-year-old children who delay gratification longer in certain laboratory situations develop into more cognitively and socially competent adolescents, achieving higher scholastic performance and coping better with frustration and stress. And I discovered in Stephen Novella's neurological blog from 2014, he seemed to make a connection between ADHD and delayed gratification, which really makes sense. And he said, quote, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, is now understood as a deficit in executive function, and it is therefore not surprising that children with ADHD perform worse on the marshmallow test. End quote. What Michelle found in his Stanford Marshmallow Test study mirrors a lot with people who are diagnosed with ADHD having worse academic, career, marriage, and just general life outcomes.
Yeah, so I have ADHD, which I didn't realize until a few years ago. But once I realized it and was actually treating it, I realized how much of my relationship with food was related to that impulsivity and that need for stimulation. So I think I probably would have failed the marshmallow test.
I think I would have failed the test too. And yes, I too have ADHD, though not diagnosed until just a year ago. What about you, Faith?
I do not have ADHD, but I still felt that I would have failed the marshmallow test because of some other factors.
Yeah, there are definitely lots of factors going into it that weren't always considered, which I'm sure we will get into.
Now, Faith, I understand you found something interesting about Japan and the marshmallow test.
This was actually something I found out while I was Googling. This was a newer study that was done at the University of Kyoto and Tokyo, I believe, in 2022. So this is a relatively newly published study, and they were trying to see if cultural factors would have an effect on how well a child could delay their gratification, and they did it with Japanese and American children. And they made sure that all these kids enjoyed marshmallows first because of, you would think, has a Japanese child actually eaten a marshmallow? Is that part of their dietary regimen, I guess, or have they been exposed to the food? And they actually found that Japanese children would do better if food was the stimulus. Here in the United States, when you go to lunch, somebody else is serving you the food. You have lunchroom staff serving you the food, and you take your tray to a table. And in Japan, the children actually serve each other, and they wait until everyone has sat down before they start eating. They say a saying, and then they start eating. In America, we don't do that. It's you get your tray and you sit down and you eat. They found if they changed the stimulus to presents, it was actually the U.S. kids that could do much, much better in delaying that gratification, because in Japan, presents aren't seen as something that's special. They give presents for almost any occasion. But here, if you go to a child's birthday party or you're in someone's house between December 1st to December 25th, you know you have gift wrap presents sitting out on tables, and no child is going up there and ripping them open. So this is what they found, is that you have to control for cultural differences with the group that you're using in order to get accurate results.
Can you go into what some of the issues with the Stanford Marshmallow Test study were?
Yes. So one of the issues was the sample size, in particular where they obtained the sample size from. They basically recruited children from the daycare on site at Stanford. These were children of professors and of staff, and they weren't really representative of a set of school children in a regular classroom.
On top of that, the samples were really small. That can have a big effect too. So in those 3 original studies that I talked about, the sample sizes were 56 with 6 dropouts, 38 with 6 dropouts, and then 16. And so when you have a group of 56, you're splitting it into 5 groups to start with. So already those groups have like 11 kids each. You have those 6 dropouts, and the dropouts were because they were kids they felt like didn't understand the instructions. So those aren't necessarily going to be even between the groups. And when you have a sample size that small, you have a group of 10 kids, then small factors are going to make a big difference. So you might have 1 or 2 kids in one of the groups who just don't really like marshmallows or pretzels. That's going to have a huge effect because that's 10% of your group. Going into those longitudinal studies, the one that looked at SAT scores, they pulled 356 preschoolers who had participated in the original study. So those 3 that I talked about, and then it was replicated a bunch of times in different ways. 653 who had participated in one of those studies, and they reached out to the parents with questionnaires. And then of those, 185 responded. And then of those ones, 94 provided SAT scores. So we went from 653 to 94. And at every level that you're losing people, you're introducing possible confounding factors, like what factors might affect whether a parent responds, and then whether or not they send SAT scores. Maybe some of the kids didn't take the SATs. At every level of that, you're introducing so many more factors that might be in play.
Well, especially when it's a survey, and I understand why they did it, but surveys can be problematic and we have to be careful about them.
Yeah, exactly. And those longitudinal studies were using kids from different studies originally. So those 3 studies that I talked about all had different factors and different things going on. And the studies beyond that also introduced different factors. And so they had to try to group these kids, even though the study conditions were different. They try to control for it. Like with each study being slightly different, you're still introducing more factors. Also, something to keep in mind as we go deeper into a lot of these problems with the study is that this isn't to vilify the researchers and say that they're like bad at studying. A lot of times these samples are because it's what's available to them. And they often point out these limitations in their own studies.
The headlines tend to go with the first line in a conclusion, and they don't tend to look at the problems that are presented by the researchers. And we're going to see an example of that a little later. Another factor that was determined to be problematic when people looked back on the research and they looked more closely at the children, they found that those from wealthy homes were more likely to practice self-control than those who came from more impoverished homes.
Yeah, so as I had mentioned earlier, most of these children had come from staff and professors from Stanford. So a lot of them we know were probably coming from financially secure backgrounds and would have food to eat at home. And one of the things that I was reading about this study is when we talk about self-control and scarcity, no one followed up with the children to see if they actually trusted the person that was leaving the room and leaving the marshmallow. We know with children, when there's food scarcity issues, that they're going to take kind of 1 in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, as we say. We're going to take what we can see because we don't know if we're going to get something later.
And now I'm going to look at another study that was done that tried to look at whether or not delayed gratification with the marshmallow test could predict body mass index 30 years later. And I'm going to just read the first few lines of the conclusion. And it said, quote, "Longer delay of gratification at age 4 years was associated with a lower BMI 3 decades later. Because this study is correlational, it is not possible to make causal inferences regarding the relationship between delay duration and BMI," end quote. And if the media only grabbed onto that first sentence, they would say, hey, look, we can predict people's BMI based on their delayed gratification. When the second sentence says, no, they can't.
Yeah, the researchers are usually very careful about how they present their conclusions, but the media are not nearly as careful.
And Faith, you have something to say about the marshmallow study and BMI.
When I first learned about this study, I was overweight and struggling with my weight. And what we're learning about weight now and even BMI, there's so many confounding factors to that.
Yeah, but to add to that, another issue is like looking at this, their ability as measured by this construct to delay gratification. And then we're choosing some measure to use to look at whatever factor we're looking at, but that might not necessarily be measuring what we think it is. Like SAT scores are not necessarily the best measure of student success, but a lot of times that's translated as these students got higher SAT scores, so it correlates with their future success. So like, especially with SAT scores and BMI, we have to think about, is it really measuring what we think it's measuring? So To end things on a kind of lighter note, after we've gone into all of these problems, if you would like to make your day significantly happier, the marshmallow test kind of became a TikTok trend. So people were taking videos of their kids doing the marshmallow test. And I actually have one. My sister took a video of my little cousin who was maybe 3 at the time and gave her a bowl of M&Ms and said, okay, don't eat this till I come back, and left the video camera running. And you can see all of these types of videos on TikTok. They're the most adorable thing. My cousin was like putting her mouth near the bowl and sticking her tongue out into it, but didn't eat the M&Ms. The things that kids will do to distract themselves is absolutely hilarious. So definitely check out some of those videos.
That's the positive side of the marshmallow study. And not necessarily using marshmallows.
No, because, sometimes kids just don't like marshmallows.
I was actually one of those kids. I never really liked marshmallows. How about you guys?
I only like them if they're melted over a campfire.
With chocolate and a graham cracker?
Yes, definitely.
I'm one of the weird ones. I've never really liked s'mores, but I will put a melted marshmallow between 2 graham crackers. Leave the chocolate out of it. It's the best thing ever.
Hard disagree, but...
That's okay. So.
I think that's a great way to finish. So I just want to thank you ladies for joining me today to talk about the Stanford Marshmallow Test.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And can you both tell me how people can find you?
You can follow all of the SGU social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, YouTube, and TikTok. Steve's TikTok videos have actually been really cool, so definitely check those out.
Thanks, Kelly and Faith.
I don't really have a very public online presence, but if you are local to the Raleigh-Durham area, North Carolina, you can find me at the Triangle Skeptics and on Susan Gerbich's Thursday night social trivia. So.
Good plug for trivia. And until next time, this is Adrienne Hill.
Richard, how do I get better at telling if people are lying?
It's really simple. What you need to do...
Ghost's real.
Well, actually, funny you should ask that, because what I've
How
discovered...
do I improve my memory?
I've got this great trick.
Can you make me happier?
Okay, look. For answers to 1,000 questions about the incredible world of human behaviour and the psychology of everyday life, join me, psychologist Richard Wiseman.
And me, science journalist Marnie Chesterton.
On Richard Wiseman's On Your Mind, a new podcast from Podimo and Telltale.
Can I win the lottery?
Probably not.
And now, a reading from the Book of Tim with Tim Mendham.
Hi, my name's Tim Mendham. I'm the editor of Australian Skeptics magazine, The Skeptic, and executive officer for the organisation. And today I'll be reading from The Skeptic magazine, volume 34, number 4, which is December 2014. On Phoney Fauna. And this is part 2 of an article that we discussed last time, in which we looked at the classic phony fauna of furried trout, jackalopes, drop bears, and of course flabbit, which is a flying rabbit, a lovely creature, none of which existed. But now we're looking at something even more complex called famous fakes of famous cryptids. In other words, a bit of fakes of fakes. The better-known monsters feature equally well-known hoaxes. The first Bigfoot hoax, sometimes described as the birth of the legend, occurred in August 1958 when a tractor operator named Jerry Crew, working on a construction site in northwest California, found a series of massive 16-inch footprints tracked through the mud. Due to the size of the prints, the Museum of Hoaxes says, the media began referring to the creature that created them as Bigfoot. The name stuck, eventually replacing Sasquatch in the popular imagination as a name for North America's legendary ape man. It was long suspected that Crew's prank-loving boss, Ray Wallace, had created the prints by strapping carved wooden feet to his boots and stomping around in the mud. This was confirmed when Wallace died in 2002 and his family came clean with the story. Before Wallace, when the creature was still called Sasquatch, there was the story of the abduction of logger prospector Albert Ostman in 1924 for breeding purposes. Ostman said, but he only revealed this story 33 years later when interest in yetis and other hairy creatures was at its height. Since then, there has been a plethora of Bigfoot stories, including the Patterson film of 1967, the Minnesota Iceman of 1968, the Bigfoot in a Freezer story of 2008, and just this year, 2014, the story of Frank, an 8-foot animal killed by the same man responsible for the freezer example. Likewise, there have been many Loch Ness Monster fakes, beginning with the spray photo of 1933, but most memorably with the so-called surgeon's photo of the next year, which we covered in the Skeptic magazine in June 2012. Now, let's look at the son of Nessie, but one story that is rarely told, and a cautionary tale for those who believe scientists are always rational and dispassionate professionals, and a fitting conclusion to this brief review of fake fakes, is that of the day that the body of Nessie was found. We can't tell it better than the Museum of Hoaxes. On the morning of Friday, March 31, 1972, an 8-member team of scientists from Yorkshire's Flamingo Park Zoo was having breakfast in the dining room of the Foyers House Hotel on the shore of Loch Ness. They were there on a joint mission with the Loch Ness Phenomena Bureau to prove the existence of a monster in the loch. They had developed a new form of hormone sex bait that they hoped would lure Nessie out of the depths. As they dug into their bacon and eggs, the manager of the hotel approached them. Someone had just called, she said, to report seeing a large hump floating in the loch near the hotel. Intrigued, the team put down their knives and forks and walked outside. Sure enough, a large, dark object was bobbing up and down in the waves about 300 yards offshore. Terence O'Brien, the leader of the team, immediately swung into action. He directed the team into their boat and they headed out to investigate. 20 minutes later, at around 9 a.m, they returned, dragging behind them a bizarre object. It appeared to be the dead body of the Loch Ness Monster. Within hours, news of the discovery had reached the rest of the world. Television news anchors solemnly informed their audience that the Loch Ness Monster had been found, but was dead. Reporters rushed to the loch to get more details. Local residents confirmed that something weird had been dragged out of the water. Robert Mackenzie, a 23-year-old Inverness musician, said, "I touched it and put my hand in its mouth. It's real, all right. I thought it looked half bear and half seal, green in colour, with a horrific head like a bear with flat ears. I was shocked." Other witnesses told reporters the creature had been between 12 and 18 feet in length and must have weighed up to 1.5 tonnes. They said it had a green body without scales and was like a cross between a walrus and a seal. Which I thought was not much of a cross, actually. Eventually, reporters contacted Don Robinson, director of the Flamingo Park Zoo, who said, "I've always been sceptical about the Loch Ness Monster, but this is definitely a monster, no doubt about it. From the reports I've had, no one has ever seen anything like it before. A fishy, scaly body with a massive head and big protruding teeth." The next morning, April 1, the discovery made front-page headlines around the world. The British press dubbed the creature Son of Nessie. Presumably they knew it was a son, not a daughter of Nessie, but we will ignore that for the time being. Meanwhile, the creature itself was no longer at the loch. After dragging the carcass back to the shore, the scientists from the Flamingo Park Zoo had sent a telegram to Robinson and had then quickly loaded the body into their truck and taken off, intending to transport the monster back to the zoo for study. Marguerite Good, manager of the Foyers Hotel, later told the press the zoologists were thrilled to bits. But when the local Inverness police heard that the scientists had hightailed it with the Loch Ness Monster, they were infuriated. These were English scientists, after all, removing Scotland's most famous lake monster, upon which depended a vast lucrative tourist trade. Immediately, the police radioed their colleagues in the Fifeshire County Police Department, explained the situation and asked them to chase down the fleeing truck and apprehend the monster nappers. They cited a 1933 Act of Parliament that prohibited the removal of unidentified creatures from Loch Ness. Sirens wailing, police cars sped off. They soon caught up with the team of scientists. The frightened zoologists readily cooperated with the police, pulling over to the side of the road and then opening the back of the truck to show the officers what they were carrying. Sure enough, according to the subsequent police report, lying inside the truck was a large, green and scaly creature. The police officers, not quite sure what to do next, radioed back to the station for advice. They were told to take the monster to the nearest town, Dunfermline, where it could be examined by Scottish scientists. In Dunfermline, the police searched around for an appropriate scientist to examine the creature and eventually persuaded Michael Rushton, General Curator of the Edinburgh Zoo, to come up and look at it. When Rushton arrived, he walked slowly around the carcass a few times, poked it once or twice, and then announced his verdict. It was indeed a strange creature, but it was no lake monster. Instead, it was a bull elephant seal, whose natural home was the South Atlantic Ocean, thousands of miles away from Scotland. Furthermore, the body showed signs of having been frozen for an extended period of time. Rushton told the press, "It is a typical member of its species. It's about 3 to 4 years old. I have never known them to come near Great Britain. Their natural habitat is the South Atlantic, Falkland Islands or South Georgia. I don't know how long it's been kept in a deep freeze, but this has obviously been done by some human hand." How a bull elephant seal came to be floating in Loch Ness remained a mystery until the next day, when a hoaxer stepped forward to confess. John Shields, the Flamingo Park Zoo's education officer, admitted it was his doing. Shields explained that an expedition to the Falkland Islands had recently brought the seal back to the UK. It had lived briefly at the Dudley Zoo, but died soon after arrival. When he learned of this, Shields realised it offered an opportunity to prank his colleagues, who he knew were going up to Loch Ness to search for the monster. Shields gained possession of the elephant seal, shaved off its whiskers, patted its cheeks with stones, and kept it frozen for a week. Then he dumped it in the loch and phoned in a tip to make sure his colleagues found it. He timed the prank so that news of the discovery of the Loch Ness monster would make headlines on April 1, April Fool's Day, which happened to also be his 23rd birthday. Shields admitted the joke got out of hand when his colleagues decided to remove the dead animal from Loch Ness and were chased down by the police. He also noted that the creature wasn't quite as impressive as initial press reports had claimed. It was only 9 foot long and weighed 350 pounds. Still, it had been a very strange thing to find floating in the loch. Police Superintendent Innes Mackay of Inverness gave the press the final official verdict on the incident. It's just an April Fool's Day joke. Having determined that the dead animal was not the Loch Ness monster, the police had no further interest in it, so they returned the carcass to the team from the Flamingo Park Zoo. The team brought the seal back to the zoo, where they put it back on ice and displayed it so crowds for a few days before properly disposing of it. But this wasn't quite the end of the story. The prank turned out to have unintended consequences for other visitors to the loch. 2 weeks later, 28-year-old Norman Slater, a school teacher from Kenosha, Wisconsin, went on a fishing trip on the loch. While floating along, he dipped his hand into the water. He later said that as soon as he did so, he detected, by means of his extrasensory perception, the presence of 6 large creatures in the water, a family of Loch Ness monsters. Slater said that he saw a particularly vivid image of a creature 70 to 90 feet in length with a large neck and a slim worm-like body. Its bottom portion was white, while its top was dark brown and scaly. He said the creatures seemed to be just lying around on the bottom. Slater also claimed to see images of underground passageways connecting the loch to the sea. But Slater was a victim of bad timing. He complained that, despite the obvious scientific importance of his vision, because of the recent April 1st prank, he couldn't find any reporters willing to take him seriously. Since then, the media have returned to their usual practice. Sightings, whether silly or not, have been given equal and undiscerning prominence, and probably always will. Phoney fauna have that sort of fascination. And that's the end of part 2 of this article on phony fauna, as it appeared in December 2014, volume 34, number 4 of the Skeptic magazine, which you can download from the magazine's website, skeptics.com.au/magazine, and see photos of Son of Nessie, the Flabbit, and such creatures.
I'm a psychic. My name is Psychic Carrie.
I'm Ross.
Oh, what a pleasure to meet you. Of course, I knew your name was Ross, as I am a psychic, but please take a seat.
Well, I was hoping we could talk about my podcast.
Yes, I know.
It's called Oh No, Ross and Carrie.
Yes.
We investigate fringe science, spirituality, and claims of the paranormal. You took the words right out of my mouth.
Yes. This whole podcast, it sounds like it's been a real challenge for you lately.
Actually, it's a lot of fun.
Yes, exactly. Because it's so fun.
I don't know how you do it.
This will be $75.
Okay, that seems fair.
Oh no, Ross and Carrie.
At MaximumFun.org. You knew it was a .org.
I have a gift.
Now it's time once again to go back to those archives at trove.nla.gov.au. Or in this case, a slight variation. I've actually gone online and did a search on the Sydney Morning Herald, found some references, and went downtown here in Sydney to the State Library where all the microfilm is kept, sat down at the table there and scrolled through and found some interesting articles. And this week we're going to be looking at the old favourite of Mind, Body, Wallet. Or Mind, Body, Spirit, if you want to give it its official title. Of course, the New Age Festival Fair, which travels around the country with stalls and stands and exhibitions and psychics and healings and mystical goings-on. And I was just going through my records going back over 20 years of Mind, Body, Wallet, and the amount of businesses which have disappeared selling all sorts of amazing cures or gadgets or remedies or whatever. And so many have gone because, well, to be honest, the products never worked in the first place. All these modalities which would soon be everywhere, all these things like, I've heard they're cancer cures and so on. Anyway, we're going to step right back into time in the Sydney Morning Herald, way back to 1994 on the 8th of December. And this is a story by Amanda Phelan, The Ohms and Ahs of Tantric Sex. Now, Tantric Sex is something I used to hear about, 20, 30 years ago. You could buy self-esteem in a bottle for $7.50 or learn to improve your sex life on a tape. You could find out the color of your aura, attain a mind orgasm at will, and even have a computer tell you how your organs were functioning. There were shakers and chakras, movers and mantras, people pulsing and tantrics titillating. Whatever your choice, it was definitely an experience at this year's Festival of the Mind, Body and Spirit at Darling Harbour. For the cynics, the event did seem to have a fairly mercenary quality, enlightenment for sale, and a cure-all for middle-class angst at a price. But for those who kept an open mind, there was lots of useful advice to be found among the maze of chimes, chants, and crystals. I fall somewhere between the two categories, since I come from Ireland, a country full of magic, but where New Age still means something to do with nappies. And the only thing someone might try to do to your aura is give it a traditional Dublin headbutt. But I found plenty to learn at the Sydney Alternative Festival, which drew a record crowd of 57,000 people last weekend. If you missed out, much of the advice is still available. For example, there was a free lecture from a visiting breast cancer expert, Dr. David Fuss, and that's spelled Fuess, a self-proclaimed teacher of, quote, internal body energetics, end quote, who is holding a seminar in the city this Sunday. See footnote. The 47-year-old Californian has helped thousands of people during the 25 years he has practiced and believes prevention of breast cancer is as important as treatment. He is typical of many alternative therapists who try to look at the whole person rather than narrow symptoms. Research shows emotions such as stress, grief, and anger play a huge part in why people get cancer, Mr. Fuss said. Meditation, diet, making quiet time for yourself, and exercise are just some of the simple techniques he suggests. In another area of the festival, practitioners from the Mossman-based, and Mossman is a suburb here in Sydney, Mossman-based Ieraci Reiki network were giving free treatments to demonstrate the techniques behind this hands-on healing system which originated in Japan. According to the Reiki philosophy, the body is capable of healing itself, provided it is supplied with good nutrition, exercise, fresh air, and a positive mental attitude. On the day of my introductory Reiki treatment, I had none of the above, but I decided to give it a try. During a healing, practitioners aim to transmit energy through the hands, which is meant to help mobilize the body's healing resources. I sat down, and a gentlewoman stood behind me and placed her hands lightly on my shoulders. I waited for something to happen. I worried about whether my shoulders were lopsided. I struggled against the thought that my Reiki healer might have some dirty hands and stain my new white blouse. Above all, I tried to block out the sound of a nasal American voice booming asinine platitudes from a neighbouring stall. I love myself. I am a success. Finally, I relaxed under the soothing pressure of the hands on my shoulders, reassured as much as anything by the human contact. It was a nice encounter, but I'm not sure if I was healed, or of what. Upstairs in the festival's lecture theatre, an Avalon couple, and again Avalon is a suburb here in Sydney, Kerry and Diane Riley, were giving a talk on tantric sex. The lecture was an introduction to a course on tantric sex techniques run by the Rileys. They have 3 children and have been together for more than 15 years, so they must have some idea of what they're on about. The course offers to, quote, provide you with the experiences and skills you will treasure and valuable secrets that will give you the ability to sustain love and sexual passion with your partner, end quote. If the Rileys are anything to go by, tantric sex can't be bad. The couple glow around each other like 2 besotted teenagers as they offer practical and humorous tips for improving your sex life and your relationships. Tantric, or sacred sex, is not limited to couples. Single people are welcome. The techniques are adopted from ancient yoga practices and incorporate lovemaking as meditation, as well as promising to expand orgasmic potential. If you have tantric lovemaking secrets, you can match the libido of any woman, said Mr. Riley. Like many modern couples, the Rileys say they find it difficult to juggle work, children, domestic duties, and making love. Part of their solution is to ritualize their lovemaking and set aside a special time and place for their ceremony. And they have even renamed their genitals, using ancient Indian terms to give them a more seductive sound. Yoni is the name for vagina, meaning place of pleasure, while lingam is penis, or wand of light. Quote, I take my vagina to the gynecologist, but I bring my yoni to Kerry to make love, end quote, smiled Mrs. Riley. The lessons don't come cheap, at $790 for couples for a 4-week course. but a one-off lecture is only $25 for couples or single people. So, why not check it out? And if your partner doesn't want to go along, you can call them a linghamhead. Oh, attempted humour there. David Fuss is lecturing on Sunday, December 11 at the Country Comfort Hotel, City, from 10 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Tickets are available at the door for $90. The Reiki Healing Centre is at 187A Avenue Road, Mossman. For information on tantric sex work, shops or tapes, telephone 947-4727. And the accompanying photograph is David Fuss sitting in the middle of a fountain at Darling Harbour near the festival. It's a fountain people can walk down in. It's quite famous here in Sydney. Health through internal body energetics, Mr. David Fuss. And now we go back some years, well, not so many years, to 1989 on the 17th of November, and this appears to be a report on the very first Mind Body Spirit Mind Body Wallet Festival in Sydney, and this is by Richard Glover, who is currently an ABC radio presenter. Today's specials: minds, bodies, snake oil. Well, truth is a pretty relative thing, says Gary Wiseman, organiser of Sydney's first festival for Mind, Body, Spirit. As about him circled the true believers, the crystal sellers, the alpha wave thinkers, and the purified water drinkers. An estimated 3,000 people came along for yesterday's opening day, filing past the 140 stalls at the Darling Harbour Exhibition Centre. Mr. Wiseman expects 20,000 people by Sunday. These are popular phrases down there. Truth is relative. It's in the eye of the beholder. It's whatever works for you. This is a spiritual supermarket in which the customer is always right. It's an Easter show of the soul. Crystals for $2,000. Spiritual capes for $450. Float tubs for $3,000. Don't look for hippies. This crowd could be from Chatswood Chase. Peter James is promoting his, quote, Enlightenment Intensive, end quote, a $290 residential course which promises, quote, someone can have an enlightenment experience in 3 days or less, end quote. He compares this with Christianity and Zen. Those methods work, but often the time frame is enormous. Tick a box for the question you want answered. In the basic course, either who am I? Or what is life? In the advanced, either what is the purpose of my life? Or what am I doing here? Upstairs, Denise Lynn, United States, talks about dream lovers. We close our eyes while she creates a sexy scene. Our dreams can include anything from embrace to orgasm. There's plenty of sincerity here, plenty of true believers, and plenty of snake oil lily whacking too. Nick and Chris believe flying saucers are made by the superpowers. Renee thinks all the great religions are largely the same. Kitty says her capes, 4 designs, allow you, quote, to create your energy and claim your own space, end quote. That's a great New Age line. I love that. Create your energy and claim your own space. There's Pyridine International with its head pyramids, a sort of psychic crash helmet made of wire. Prices $45 to $125. Or Simon Turnbull with his mail-order computer tarot. Question: how do I know the reading applies to me? Answer: it can't apply to anybody else because you initiated the reading. Or Crystal Habit, run by 61-year-old Arthur Roffey, President of the Gem and Laboratory Council of New South Wales, a body not known for its spiritual side. He draws close and whispers, you don't necessarily have to believe in something to sell it. If it helps them psychologically, who am I to say it doesn't work? He shows off his chart: smoky quartz for depression, emeralds for dreaming, rose quartz for fear. Or try the aromatherapy stall. where fear is solved with a sniff of frankincense. A 9-ounce bottle containing the, quote, life force of the plant, end quote, costs $10 to $350. RiAci is running the stall for the Younger Centre of Light and Healing near Nimbin. Nimbin being a little hippie community up in the north part of the state. We teach people ways of taking charge of their lives, recognizing that negativity is just an ego thing. He charges $210 for 4 days. Ms. Susie Holbeck, a British lecturer on crystal power, goes further. People should concentrate on their own lives, trying to save endangered species and, quote, worrying about the starving of Ethiopia, end quote, adds to the power of negativity in the world. Ms. Holbeck, lecture $6, says the disintegration of the ozone layer is the spiritual equivalent of a woman's waters breaking before childbirth. It indicates we are about to be lifted into another state, where we will, quote, be part of the cosmos in a different way and become co-creators with God, end quote. Let me see, 1989, and she thought that something was just about to happen. It's the old any day now argument. Any day now this will happen, any day now that will happen, any day now this God will do this, that or the other. And the any day now never comes. Miss Holbeck also notes that her crystal gives off smoke when she uses it. That must be a sight to see. Sandra Lee Sirio from Ohio can tell you about your past and present lives. $16 for 15 minutes. In my current life, she says, my superiors force me to work too hard. Editor, take note. One of them also has a drinking problem. She says that in my past lives I've been the chief mathematical engineer on the pyramids, a Viking warrior, a French noblewoman, and a Chinese or Tibetan monk. As she speaks, I wonder, how come nobody was ever a grime-covered peasant? Barry Williams, president of the Australian Skeptics, wanders past.
They seem to believe in everything at once. They don't accept that if some things are true, then others can't be.
It's the typical comment of a skeptic. We had them around on the pyramids, you know. And the accompanying photograph is very informative because it's taken from above, looking down into some of the stalls. And the caption reads, a peek at the New Age stalls. Two hug each other in a moment of spiritual awareness. Skin toning without surgery. And a believer receives crystal therapy treatment. And you can see the same sort of things going on to this very day. Of course, noting that many of the modalities over the years are flash in the pans. They come and go very quickly. They might be around for 1 or 2 shows and then they simply disappear. The businesses pack up and fold up and go away because the product never worked in the first place. Mind, Body, Spirit, Mind, Body, Wallet, way back in the late 80s and the early 90s. While much has come and gone, some things certainly stay the same. There is always a psychic reading room, for example. There are always crystals for healing. There's always things like chiropractic and homeopathy. But there you go, just another peek into the newspaper archives, in this case the archives of the Sydney Morning Herald. But no matter where you are around the world, I'm sure your country has newspaper archives. If not, why not visit the Trove archives and peek into Australian history at trove.nla.gov.au, because when you go there, or other references, you never know. You never know what you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast this week. Thank you to those people who continue to support the show via Patreon and PayPal at skepticzone.tv. Your contribution means the show keeps going. And don't forget, you can go to your very own Skeptics Convention in Melbourne, the 2nd to the 3rd of December, the 39th Annual Australian Skeptics National Convention. And what a lineup of speakers the Melbourne people have in store for you. We have such wonderful people as Susan Gerbic. How could you possibly have a Skeptics Convention without Susan Gerbic, the world-famous skeptical activist? Melanie Trisick-King will be appearing. Annie McCubbin, famous author, will be there. Dr. John Cook, Mal Vickers, Gideon Katz, Liam Mannix, Melissa Davey, Sue Ieraci, who you heard on today's episode. Sue Ieraci will be there. Stephen Vivaro, Adam Ford, Tim Grant. Look, the list just keeps going on and on. For more information about this wonderful convention and to get your tickets, get them quick, head to skepticon.org.au, skepticon.org.au. Well, that's enough for me. I'm going to have another root beer in this echo chamber. Hello, hello, hello. So for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Oakland, California.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for episodes and show notes with links going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone on Facebook, X, TikTok and YouTube by clicking the links at our homepage, together with links to support the show financially via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed by our guests are not necessarily those of the Skeptic Zone podcast or any other skeptical organisation.